Hello everyone, this is Iran Talk, and in this video I'd like to revisit the question of Afghan immigration to Iran. This video will seek to prove the disastrous situation that's currently present in Iran in regards to Afghan immigration. According to most recent estimates, Afghans in Iran have around 3 to 4 children per family, and this is critical as it means that the Afghans are slowly reproducing at a higher rate compared to the general population and are outpopulating Iranians within their own country, especially within their own cities. In fact, based on the latest data, there are between 5 to 10 million Afghans currently residing within Iran, which is quite unfortunate and very disastrous for the future of the country. Not only do these Afghan migrants pose a major security threat to Iran, they're also genetically distinct and foreign to the Iranians of today, and they're very distinct overall from the Iranian population, and their migration to Iran it will be disastrous for the future of the country. For this video, I will be first presenting evidence for the recent uptick in Afghan migration to Iran, and then I will be taking a look at the genetics aspect. The sources featured in this video are both from Iranian regime outlets as well as outlets which are opposed to the government. I will also be taking a look at the parallel situation between Afghan immigration to Iran and Pakistan and how the Pakistani authorities have dealt with the situation. Now, before I begin this analysis, I'd just like to apologize to the Bandari and Baluchi community of Iran, as I previously said they weren't Iranian. Recent genetic evidence presented by Azad Mard, however, has proven that they are largely of Iranian genetic descent. Here are the FST distances from Azad Mard for the Baluchis, and you can see genetically they're very close to other Iranian groups. As you can see, the distance is very low between these populations and other Iranian populations. Now here we have the FST distances for the Bandaris, and you can see genetically the Bandaris are very close to the other Iranian populations, and what this means is that they're also mostly Iranian. Thus, overall, these results prove that the Bandaris and the Baluchis are largely genetically an Iranian population in contrast to the previous claims I made on the matter, so do keep that in mind. Again, I'd like to apologize all Baluchi and Bandari Iranians. While this may apply to the Baluchis and Bandaris, I stand by my words that this does not apply to the general Afghan population, especially the Hazaras. Now I'd like to get into that. Thus, without further ado, I'd like to begin this analysis. Now up first we have the first of these articles, and this was released at the end of July of this year. So you can see that the title is Iran Regimes Want More Afghans as a Base of Support. What you can see here is that around 5 billion of the 90 to 100 billion annual subsidies of the government of Iran is given to Afghans. So what this means is that despite not being citizens of the country, the Afghans are taking up around 5 billion of the total subsidies for the Iranian people. In fact, you can see that moving on, this article considers the regime to be beneficiary from these Afghan migrants due to Iran's low birth rate. So this is another threat to the Iranian population which the regime is posing, and this is why I am opposed to this ridiculous government which is currently in power in Iran. Moving on, you can see that the Iranian government is very much complicit in this, and they're allowing Afghans to buy a property in various cities across Iran, including Qom, and the majority of these are actually Hazara Mongols. So for the most part, they're allowing a largely foreign population within Iran to buy property and have control over the internal affairs of the country. And as you'll see, they're also using this to strengthen their political grasp over the country. Now moving on, from the same exact outlet, there was another article published, and this was in August of this year. So the title was Afghan Refugees Pose a Major Challenge in Iran, Ex-Lawmaker Says. And as you can see, the article says around 1.5 million of these total 7.5 to 8 million Afghans have a military background, and this is very alarming. And then you can see that the article goes on to say that the government of Iran is giving these migrants subsidies, and this is what's allowing them to stay within Iran, and this is a major problem. And what's also interesting here is that these Afghans are being used to fix the problem of Iran's declining population. Later on, you can see that the case is made about these migrants overall, that they'll be changing the demographics of the country, as they have 3 children compared to one of most Iranian families, and soon they may become the majority in many of Iran's cities. And this is actually problematic for the future of Iran's demographics as well as Iran's internal security. Now, the next article here was released at the end of last month, and the title was Concerns Rise Over Growing Afghan Population in Iran. This article considers both questions of whether or not the Afghan migrants pose a threat to the regime or if they're beneficial to the Iranian government. The article goes on to say that based on some of the leaked conversations of leading Iranian figures, the foreign population in Iran, specifically from Afghanistan, could range from 5 to 15 million. Overall, what this means is that these immigrants could pose a major threat to the future of the country. What's also interesting here is that you can see that there are around 10,000 Afghans coming to the country per day, and they've also been outperforming Iranians in terms of birth rates, as in a town near Shiraz, 297 of the 300 babies that were born this past fall were of Afghan descent. Moving on, you can see that the same article says how the government is actually encouraging the increase of the Afghan population because they believe that this will somehow benefit the government, especially concerning their support base within the country. So basically, they're attempting to replace the native Iranian population with Afghan migrants. And the article concludes by mentioning how the Afghans who are arriving are mostly of Sunni descent. What this means is that they're followers of the Sunni creed, and if they end up replacing most of the indigenous Iranians, then the Sunnis will hold sway within Iran. But also there are Shiite migrants as well. But what the author failed to realize is that most of these are Mongol Hazaras who are traditionally enemies of the Iranian people and actually massacred a great many Iranians during their rampage across Central Asia and Iran. Overall, these migrants pose a major threat to the future of the Iranian people and the Iranian nation. Another article which was released by the same outlet was titled Iranian MP Reveals Plans to Grant Political Citizenship to Afghans. So this was released last month as well. And what's critical to note here is that the Iranian MP in question, Mahmoud Ahmadi Bigash, wanted to issue citizenship to the Afghan migrants to allow them to participate in the political sphere of the Iranian government. So this is in order to help the Iranian government maintain its stranglehold over the Iranian people. So this is another very disastrous attempt of the disregard posed by the Iranian government towards the Iranian people, and this shows that the Iranian government is actually an enemy of Iranians. Once again, this article highlights the globalist nature of the Iranian government. The next article is titled Iranian Hardliners Dismiss Rising Concerns Over Afghan Immigration. This article takes an in-depth look at the nature of the government in facilitating the replacement of the Iranian people with Afghan migrants. Many of those who support the regime, including news outlets, have claimed that this is just a part of Afghan phobia, but it's not a part of Afghan phobia, as you'll be able to see here. These Afghans residing within Iran actually are celebrating with the Taliban flag in their support for their government and their total demographic conquest of Iran. Now here's the video in question, and you can see again the individual here is very happy and he's holding a Taliban flag, and this is in Mashhad in Iran, which is very interesting. And you can actually check out the video yourself since I've sourced much of the material used in this video in the description. Again, this video proves that these Afghans are not friends of Iranians. Basically, what the article goes on to say is that this is actually posing a major threat to Iranians, as most of these Afghans are pro-Taliban Sunnis, and they're going to create a major problem within the city of Mashhad and then the rest of Iran, as they are buying up a significant part of the property in the city. Overall, this proves that these Afghans pose a major threat to the demographic integrity of Iran as well as the Iranian cultural milieu. Now, moving on from that article, another article was released, and this one came out at the beginning of this month, and it was titled Nearly 2.5 million Afghans Reside in Western Tehran. To get into the gist of this article, you can see that it says that there are around 2.5 million Afghans within Tehran alone, and this means that even within Iran's largest city, the Afghan migrants form a major proportion of the total population there. And this article, in fact, concludes by saying how there are plans by the Iranian government to grant citizenship to these Afghans, and this would pose a major challenge to the future of the country. And this means that this will pose a major threat to the future of Iranian cities as well as Iran's demographic balance. To further prove the complicit nature of the regime in facilitating the replacement of Iranians, you can see that this government outlet pretty much says that these Afghans do not pose any threat to the country. And again, what this highlights is the complicit nature of the regime and government outlets in the replacement of the indigenous Iranian element. Now, regarding another article that was released on the same matter, this article was titled Crackdown Bleak Prospects Force Iranian Students to Migrate. So basically, the gist of this article is that a large proportion of the students within Iran's universities are actually migrating, and this is actually making way for the incoming Afghan and other foreign students. So this is primarily due to the crackdown of the regime as well as its violent nature. For this reason alone, the regime can no longer be trusted in terms of governing Iran. The article actually goes on to say that those enrolled in Tehran's University for Medicine actually left the country for good in 2014, and this is unfortunate. And even President Rouhani criticized the harsh treatment of the elite. So this is likely and largely brought about by the harsh nature of the regime. Again, the pattern is clear here. The Iranian regime is facilitating the replacement of Iranians. This is no longer a secret but open knowledge. Now, many of you may be wondering, how does the Iranian population react to this? And this was actually covered in an article titled Afghan Immigrants in Iran Face Various Challenges. This article is actually one amongst many which takes a look at the treatment of the Afghans by the Iranians, and you can see that the Iranian people are actually hostile to the Afghan immigrants. Many of them attack their houses, their cities, which is a very good thing, and they should continue to do this, as this will shorten the amount of time the Afghans stay within the country, and this is excellent news. And this shows that the Iranian people are actually reacting to their own replacement within their own homeland. Again, what this shows is that the Iranian people have no sympathy or regard for the Afghan migrants. Now, moving on, what's interesting to note here is that there are many Afghan migrants in Pakistan as well. And in fact, in a recent article published by Reuters, the Pakistani government is openly seeking to deport all illegal Afghans, which amount to around 1.7 million people by the end of November. So this is very interesting. And you can see that this is due to the threat that the Afghans pose, specifically the security threat to the Pakistani nation. And you can see that around 14 of the 25 suicide bombings in this year from within Pakistan were carried out by Afghan nationals. So you can see this shows the disastrous consequences a nation which hosts Afghan migrants actually has to undergo. And you can see that the article actually goes on to say that the primary reason for this is that these Afghan migrants have been flooding the country since the US invasion of Afghanistan ended in 2021 and the Taliban took control. So because of the Taliban, most of these immigrants are fleeing, but despite fleeing the Taliban, they have sympathies for their government. And this is evident from both the suicide bombings undertaken by these Afghan nationals in Pakistan as well as the pro-Taliban celebrations in Mashhad. Now finally, in regards to the reactions of international organizations such as Amnesty International, you can see that they stated that the Pakistan government must not deport Afghan refugees. So for some reason, these governments are very keen on supporting these sort of migrants. And actually, the article goes on to say that this is mostly due to the takeover of Afghanistan by the Taliban. But keep in mind that this is the problem that the Afghan people have to undergo themselves, and they should not be putting their problems on other people than other nations. Now that's essentially it for this phase of the video. In the next phase of the video, I'll be taking a look at the latest demographic information from Iran that's available based on the fertility rates of the Iranian population, including the migrants. Now here is the information in question, and this is from a recent study. Now, while I won't get into this too much, you can see that the fertility rate for Iranians is very low, and it's a bit higher when incorporating into the total Iranian population, including the immigrants. So without the immigrants, in 2022, the fertility rate was at 1.65, but with the immigrants, it's at 1.74. So the Afghan migration in some of these provinces, their impact is very significant and felt, and this is rather unfortunate. What this means is that slowly the Afghans are replacing the indigenous Iranian population, as you saw with the example from the town near Shiraz, and this shows that the government is very much complicit in this replacement. Overall, this is rather unfortunate and goes to the poor policy making of the Iranian government and is another factor as to why the Iranian government must be replaced. With a nationalist government in power, these ills can be taken care of. Now that's essentially it for this phase of the video, and in the next phase of the video I'll be presenting genetic evidence to prove that these Afghan migrants are very distinct from the general Iranian population and are not as Iranian as many people consider them or believe them to be, which is rather unfortunate that many Iranians are under the false impression that these are populations genetically identical to other Iranians. Thus, without further ado, I'd like to begin the final phase of this analysis. Now here are the results for the Pashtuns of Afghanistan. So you can see they're on average 30.3% Yamnaya, 26.2% Iran Neolithic, 14.5% Neolithic Anatolian, 0.2% Neolithic Caucasian, 4.4% Neolithic East Asian, and most pertinently around 24.4% Neolithic South Asian. So this is basically an Indus Valley sample that's being used here, but nonetheless you can see that the Afghans have significant South Asian ancestry, and despite their Yamnayan ancestry being a bit higher than the Yamnayan ancestry harbored by modern Iranians, nonetheless you can see that they have significantly more South Asian ancestry. For this reason, the Afghans are a population which has significant South Asian ancestry and thus are a bit distinct from the general Iranian population. Up next, here are the results for the Mongolian Hazaras. So these are Mongolian descended Iranic speakers who reside within central Afghanistan and have recently migrated to Iran. So you can see they're on average 43.4% Neolithic East Asian, 21.8% Yamnaya, 12.2% Neolithic South Asian, 12.0% Neolithic Iranian, and 10.6% Neolithic Anatolian. Now with these Hazaras, you can see that in terms of their descent, they have significant East Asian ancestry, and for this reason, they're not Iranian or even mostly of Iranian descent. As you can see, they're only 21.8% Yamnayan and 12.0% Neolithic Iranian. So overall, the Hazaras are a largely foreign population compared to the general Iranian population. What this means is that for those who claim that the Hazaras are as Iranian as any other Iranian should reconsider their views in this regard, as you can see clearly they're not, and they're mostly of Mongolian descent. Now, I actually would not have a problem with the Hazaras if it wasn't for one fact. Keep in mind that these people are the descendants of those Mongols who marauded and raped and pillaged their way through Iranian Central Asia into the Iranian plateau. In fact, it is believed that the Mongols actually killed between 50 to 75% of the population of the Iranian plateau and 90% of the population of Iranian Central Asia. Thus, it's wrong for Iranians to welcome these Hazaras as their brethren. Now here are the results for the modern day Iranians, and you can see they're on average 19.3% Yamnayan, 37.8% Neolithic Iranian, 21.5% Neolithic Anatolian, 7.1% Neolithic Caucasian, 10.3% Neolithic Levantine, 2.2% Neolithic East Asian, and only 1.8% Neolithic South Asian. Thus, with these results, you can see a largely Iranian descent for modern-day Iranians, as you can see significant Yamnayan, Neolithic Iranian, Neolithic Anatolian ancestry, which is very interesting, and only minimal Neolithic Caucasian, Neolithic Levantine, Neolithic East Asian, and Neolithic South Asian ancestry. Moving on, here are the breakdowns for the Kurds, and what you'll be able to see is that the Kurds have a genetic profile which is very similar to other Iranians. Mind you, these are the Kurds from Iran. Now what you can see with the Iranian Kurds is that they're on average 18.6% Yamnayan, 35.2% Neolithic Iranian, 21.4% Neolithic Anatolian, 9.5% Neolithic Caucasian, 13.6% Neolithic Levantine, 1.4% Neolithic East Asian, and 0.4% Neolithic South Asian. As you can see, the Kurds are largely of Iranian descent and their genetic profile is very close to other Iranians. Now the final population I'd like to take a look at here are the Iranian Azerbaijanis. What you'll be able to see here is that despite having a bit more foreign ancestry, the Azerbaijanis are nonetheless largely genetically Iranian. Now you can see that the Azerbaijanis are on average 17.3% Yamnayan Samaran, 28.5% Neolithic Iranian, 25.2% Neolithic Anatolian, 11.7% Neolithic Caucasian, 11.4% Neolithic Levantine, 5.9% Neolithic East Asian, and 0.1% Neolithic South Asian. Overall, what you can see here is that on a genetic level, the Azerbaijanis are largely Iranian, which is quite interesting. And also their East Asian ancestry is at a minimum, and what this means is that they're not genetically Turkic. To conclude, overall, this video took a look at the threat posed to Iran by Afghan migrants and analyzed this based on the available recent sources from Iranian media outlets both within and outside of Iran. What this analysis also showed is that the Afghans pose a major threat to the Iranians and the Iranian people and are also very distinct from them genetically. Overall, as you were able to see, if this is not reversed, Iran can have a major demographic problem in the future. And in fact, this is very similar to the demographic challenge faced by the West. That's essentially it for this video. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.